Welcome back. We're talking about the 1 millionth addition to the US terrorist watch list. Since its conception, the list has had various criticisms levelled at it. Civil rights groups say the watch list hampers millions of travellers by including in it the federal no-fly list of people not allowed on commercial flights. They argue there should be a system in place to allow those named on the list to appeal their inclusion. They've also called for improving the procedures for removing wrongly included names, as well as highlighting the problem of misidentification. This has led to several high-profile people being detained unnecessarily. Earlier this year, even an internal report by the United States Justice Department called into question the administration of the list. The report stated that the FBI and other federal agencies had indeed provided outdated and inaccurate information. But the Terrorism Screening Centre that maintains the list claims it has already put in place several steps to ensure its accuracy. Well, we're joined again by our guests. In Anchorage, Alaska, Bill Scannell. In Washington, D.C., David Gartenstein-Ross. And in London, Sahir Hussain. Sahir Hussain, in some ways, people are watched a lot these days anyway. It's closed-circuit television, all sorts of other ways that, you know, even the supermarkets can keep information about you. Why should we be worried about this list in particular?
Well, this is the whole process. There is a sort of culture of surveillance that's developed all over the world, and the 9/11 simply accelerated the whole process, and in a sense brought some legitimacy from many members of the public in various countries where people have normally been quite sort of careful about losing any aspect of their privacy. What I'd say is that there's a climate of fear that's been generated. As a result of that climate of fear, people are just willing to give away their liberties. The reality is, though, that at this moment, and we've seen this in London recently when the Shadow Home Secretary resigned to fight on a campaign of civil liberties, is that non-Muslims also now are realizing the wider implications of this. The liberties that were hard-won over centuries from monarchs and from authoritarian leaderships are now being slowly given away to supposedly democratic governments who are supposed to be acting in the interest of the people, and when in fact they're not.
David Gartenstein-Ross, that's a fair point, isn't it? That's been a slow, gradual process and erosion of people's liberties. Is there a danger that there's going to be a backlash against it?
Yes, there certainly is. I would say that in terms of the things that I think we should care about, the inconvenience that comes with being subjected to additional questions, I think, is lower on the list than a lot of other things that I think are more disturbing. Because what we're talking about here is not that people can't fly. Rather, it's that one of two things happens. Number one, you don't know why you're on the list and you get put on a list. Or number two, there are false positives that come up. Either way, the implication of it is additional questioning rather than someone not being able to fly whatsoever. So I think it's important to put this into context, but certainly one of the things that happened after 9/11 was a lot of governments had a very broad shotgun approach. And we've been in a period, I think, for the past 2 or 2.5 years, at least on a U.S. level, where we've been trying to refine some of the mechanisms. I don't think it's perfect by any means, but we're now swinging in the direction of saying, okay, how can we make these more perfect? How can we make them better and less inconvenient for everybody?
Okay, Bill Scannell, what do you think? I mean, David Gartenstein-Ross seems to think that it's simply a question of having more questions being asked. But once your name is on a list like this, in your experience, does it mean that actually people can dig into your information a lot more?
Well, first of all, your local supermarket can't have you arrested, detained without trial, and thrown in a prison ship off the coast of Virginia or in Guantanamo Bay. The idea that what Mr. Gartenstein-Ross is arguing, that somehow we should be looking at putting a happy face on authoritarian tools is something that I and anyone with a 5th grade civics class in the United States in American history and the Constitution would oppose.
Would you accept that
my country goes through periods of things like this?
Yeah, one of the things, the arguments that people who support these kind of measures would put is that there have been no major attacks in the United States since all these measures came in, so they're kind of fair enough. What do you say to that?
Well, I go back to the rock that I held up before. You know, I've carried that rock around for years, and I've never been struck by lightning nor been sucked up into a tornado. This whole idea that you can of disproving a negative is absurd, and the idea that somehow that we've been violating the rights of millions of people, preventing people from travel. Now, for the past month, we're demanding that everyone show identification before they travel within in the United States, or they're not allowed to fly. This is reprehensible. This does nothing for security. It's security theater. What it does do is allow the war profiteers, the fearmongers, and all of these other people to make money. And one can only hope that come January of next year, that the cycle will swing the other direction, and these people will have to find something else to scare people about.
Sahir Hussain, just to broaden it out, I mean, it's not just in the States that measures have been brought in, it's elsewhere around Europe, as you were mentioning. But there is all still, the governments are under pressure to provide security, or to be seen to be providing security. They're caught in a difficult position, aren't they?
Well, no, it's a sort of a problem of their own making, as we see less and less sort of ideological differences between different political parties in democracies. One, the sure way of getting the attention is the climate of fear of crime and terrorism, and certainly they've been very successful. And what has led to is the bigger and bigger databases in otherwise democratic countries, where the citizens are now being watched more and more closely. And I say to anybody who's interested in sort of foundations or laying the foundations of democracy, that this is very much undermining those foundations. And what it is doing is giving the corporate state more and more power. And we only need somebody sort of dishonest and disingenuous leadership to exploit that, whether it means targeting a particular minority, or whether it means targeting a particular political viewpoint. That is not something that's very healthy at all. And it doesn't sort of bode well for a future of democracy when you have the computerized state having all this information about you.
David Gartenstein-Ross, climate of fear and undermining the foundations of democracy. What would you say to those points?
I think that they're quite a bit overblown when dealing with this specific thing. I mean, especially Bill's point that you could take people and put them off in a prison ship or in Guantanamo Bay. That's not what these lists do. These lists cannot put someone in Guantanamo Bay. They cannot put someone in a prison ship. Instead, these are lists that are designed to look at whether someone in the United States flying on an airplane should be subjected to additional screening. That's it. This is not even the no-fly list. I think it's important to have a sense of proportion. What I'm hearing, and look, there is certainly legitimacy to some of the claims being made. There are points on which we agree, and I've talked about those in basically every time that you've come to me during this. But overall, I think it's important to have a sense of context, and what I hear is a lot of hyperbole about the specific subject we're talking about, and that specific subject is lists that determine whether someone should be singled out for additional screening. This isn't Guantanamo Bay.
Okay, Bill Scanlon, just very briefly, it is simply additional scrutiny.
A secret list administered by secret law is an abomination and flies in the face of any sort of democratic tradition. By allowing such things to continue to exist, I think that it is more than fair to say that the terrorists do win. And those who profit from selling and vetting these lists are equally culpable. I'm
afraid we have to leave there because we've unfortunately run out of time on this hot topic. In Anchorage, Alaska, Bill Scannell. Thank you very much indeed. In Washington, D.C., David Gartenstein-Ross, thank you too. And also in London, Sahir Hussain, thank you all for your time. And thank you very much for watching this edition of Inside Story. We always welcome your comments and suggestions. Email them to us, insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.